Anyone out there would like to kick us off, please, with a question for any of our speakers? Colin.
For Debbie, first of all, thank you, Debbie, for an inspirational talk about the work. And it's I do strongly commend it, beautifully written and presented. A couple of questions. Maybe a comment too. You talked about the lack of young people living in North Yorkshire. The reason is they all live in the great conurbations all the way around Yorkshire, like West Yorkshire, Teesside, Hull, or wherever. Very important, the connection between the two. And I wondered whether or not you might pick up one of the key points in the report about the need for English devolution and a strong region when we can all work together, both the rural and the urban parts of Yorkshire. And a second, small follow-up, could you tell us a little bit about the Yorkshire Climate Commission and the very good relationship with the Rural Commission?
Right, thank you. I couldn't agree more with your comment about connectivity. We've talked about broadband, but it's also physical connectivity between the cities or the more metropolitan areas and the rural areas. I think what concerned us on the Commission was that we didn't always want the only option for young people that were there to be one way. And therefore, we needed to look at how we made North Yorkshire more attractive, not just to people who were born here, that instead of coming back when they were 60, come back when they're maybe 35 or 40. Everyone needs their bit of time in the city and all the rest of it. We're not trying to stop that. But also how we could attract people that weren't born here to come and actually do some of the skills, bring in the skills that we need. And therefore, when we were looking at connectivity, obviously digital was huge because then you can more or less work from anywhere. But we did look a lot at how we should transport people, how the arteries should work. And there is quite a lot in the report, as you say, about options for doing that. In terms of, sorry, is that?
So, regional devolution and the idea of
regional, it was, I'm going to be naughty here. When we started off in 2019, there were two models. There was the bifurcated model, which was basically east and west, and I think somebody got a saw out and saw through York and it went one side or the other. And then there was the unitary devolution option. I still think it's very exciting that we published and the report went to the Secretary of State 2 weeks before he made his decision on whether it was east-west or the unitary council for the whole of North Yorkshire. I'm sure receiving an in-depth project which looked forward at what a holistic North Yorkshire could do didn't sway him at all. But nevertheless, the unitary council with York and then North Yorkshire basically was chosen by the Secretary of State, and there was celebrating in certain quarters and not so much in others. I think devolution is probably essential. For one thing, it's actually, if the wealth and the opportunity were slightly more fairly distributed, and I'm not doing a sort of, Communist Party thing here, but if, maybe I'll put it in a better way, if the money that's currently comes out of North Yorkshire was to stay in North Yorkshire, and we put forward a proposition of a mutual bank, which would give people who had the luxury of some money they wanted to invest in their own environment, then actually a unitary council with that sort of freedom would have some quite exciting opportunities. I think the other thing we want to do is we want to ensure, and again, personal opinion, I think there's a lot more between SW1 and YO21 than 250 miles. I genuinely don't think people in the civil service or in power in Westminster really do get us. And I think one of the issues is we send a lot of money south. If we could keep that money, I'm sure we, as North Yorkshire and York, would know the priorities and the spending and the needs that we have better. So that's why we came out so strongly for devolution. It was basically to give us the ability of using the wealth that's created in our county for the greater good of our county.
And the whole of Yorkshire, of course.
Yes. Last but not least, again, I have to declare a bit of an input here. I was told about the Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission when it was in it's just they were thinking about it. And I must admit, poor Andy Goulson at the University of Leeds got absolutely bombarded by me. Because I said to him, Andy, I know human nature. You've got places like Sheffield and Leeds and Hull. They're all amazing places. But my goodness, they are going to dominate the conversation. And therefore, we kept Andy appraised of what we were doing on the Rural Commission, sent him reports as they were coming out, and all the rest of it. And I'm delighted that Andy has actually two of us, to my knowledge, which is Chris Clark, who's working with DEFRA on all the things you heard about this morning, and myself have inputted into that York and Humber Climate Commission, specifically about the challenges of rural parts of Yorkshire and Humber, to ensure that there's balance between the metropolitan and the rural areas. I await with interest. It's meant to be published before COP26 or around the time of COP26. I know one of the bits of feedback that I was very pleased with was that they said, we've read it and it's the Rural Commission and it's really bold. And that's going to inspire us to be bold. So sorry, I've taken too much time.
Tom?
Yeah, it's just a brief comment on devolution regionally. It's something that we followed closely with interest as a national park authority. Ourselves and the Dales are both supportive of a devolution settlement for North Yorkshire in principle, and we've contributed to the development of the regional devolution bid. Important to draw a distinction between local government reform, of which a proposal has been adopted by the Secretary of State, and devolution, which is a separate, albeit not entirely unrelated proposal. That's not over the line, and it'll be interesting to see whether and when we see a levelling up white paper under the new Secretary of State, who's Michael Gove, who's got responsibility for all of that area. I mean, I'd echo Debbie. I think it has massive potential. It's why we supported it in terms of both the regional economic development agenda, but also at the heart of the devolution bid for North Yorkshire's position in the region as being the first carbon negative region, of which we think protected landscapes are part of the solution. So that's why we've been involved in it. The only little bit to watch out for, and I think this covers all national parks in England, not just us, is our support's part of the caveated on ultimately the planning powers of national park authorities remaining in national park authorities, because often in mayoral combined authorities, of which devolution settlements are often intrinsically linked with, there is a planning settlement, and North Yorkshire will also have one. But it's really important that you don't lose sight of the fact that planning is one of the few statutory powers that national park authorities do possess, and it's there for a reason, because it supports and upholds the delivery of national park purposes. So it's just a little bit of a watch out. I'm not unduly concerned at this stage, but we'll see when the levelling up white paper comes out.
Could you identify yourselves, please? Yes.
So, Mark Corner, Friends of the Dales. A question for Tom. On one of your four buckets was the sort of post-COVID response and the opportunity to help with sort of national recovery. Can I ask you what steps your authorities has taken in terms of reprioritising your own plans or changing plans or putting new plans to respond to that? What are you doing differently given that challenge and opportunity?
I think it's a really good question, and some of this will come out of the wash in terms of the next management plan and then our own strategy going forward as an authority, of which we're still working on. I guess there's quite a lot that we do already that we can demonstrably prove makes an impact and a difference in terms of health and well-being. So under Andy's leadership, we did a really innovative piece of research work a couple of years ago looking at the social return on investment of a couple of our programmes. So one is focused around our work with young people, but particularly young people from deprived communities or from background or from backgrounds or with historical issues which have meant that they've become a bit disconnected from society, and we're able to demonstrate through that work how we make massive improvements in their own health and well-being and the health and well-being of their families. The second is our volunteer programme. So we're really proud of our volunteering programme. We have something like 700 to 800 volunteers on the books, probably about 500 who are active. But it's more the quality of the outcome that it delivers in terms of their own health and well-being. Clearly that's been massively impacted by the pandemic and the limitations, as David talked about, on volunteering. But we've recovered that ground. But again, something like a 7-to-1 return on investment from volunteering. And so reorientating our volunteering programme away from a pure numbers game towards delivering the greatest possible social return investment and health and well-being outcome, I think will be one of it. I think the area that we'd really like to get into is clinical commissioning. It's been a real challenge for all national parks, and areas like the New Forest have probably done a little bit better than others have done. We're working quite closely with Tees Health. Would love to work a bit more closely with the health authorities in North Yorkshire, but that's a real area and an opportunity for us. Challenge there is it's often led through GP practices, and of course they all work individually, but we've got a little bit of interest in the area, and we'll try and kindle that interest and grow it and develop it.
Thank you.
David Felton, Friends of the Lake District. A question mainly for Kate, but would be interested in others' views as well. Kate, you talk about the revolutionary spirit of some of our forebears who campaigned for wonderful landscapes. And it strikes me that a lot of that history has been lost, particularly to younger people. And if we believe that you only fight for what you understand and for some of these things that you're passionate about, I'm just wondering, how do we engage younger people into their 30s and 40s to think about some of the politics, I suppose, around this, so that we can start fighting again?
I wish I had an easy answer to that. I was really fortunate because I was young but inspired and had the opportunity, and so many, that was a kind of chance in a lifetime for me. But I think we have to work out how, what is the language of younger people, and I'm kind of out of touch with them really, but others here will have contact with younger people, and I think you kind of got to start by finding maybe just a few champions, a few sort of Greta Thunbergs of the national park movement who will inspire others. I think that's kind of the way one has to go. I don't think sort of just talking to groups of young people in our language will necessarily inspire them at all. I know that everybody here knows what I'm talking about and kind of feels it, because even if you weren't a part of it, you've got that memory of somebody who was, and the names still resonate in your organisations. But I do think we've got to kind of probably work at finding, the individual champions who will then speak for us. It's a bit like the way Mosaic worked, actually. I mean, Mosaic is such a great example of a way of doing things that CNP championed, it's nearly 22 years ago. The way CNP tackled that was by finding these community champions, people in the communities, who would then sell the message and come out to parks. So Maxwell Iamba is, one of the ones that I mentioned, and it worked. But of course, it didn't go on forever. But it was doing great stuff. So it is that championing, that ambassadorial role, I think, which isn't terribly helpful because I haven't got practicalities. But I think that's how one tackles it.
Helen Gundry, Morsbus Community Interest Company. I was just going to say that one of the things is enabling young people to get to the national park, because most national parks are not accessible without a car, and a lot of young people can't afford to drive. So getting more income streams into transport, and it's not little hubs for local people to get around. This is getting, making the visitor economy greener and getting more people into the park using public transport. Really needs extra income streams. I'm not looking just at Tom, who knows that he can help, but there's all sorts of other income streams that we need to make it work. that will bring out some more champions. And one idea we had was, for instance, just doing using social media, doing video blogs for young people coming out, using the park, and then using the media to spread the story that way. You know, because a lot of you, that's one way that people talk to each other, isn't it? So
Yeah, definitely.
Did you think on just to pick up this point about communicating with the groups that might take on those sorts of enthusiasms from younger people? I mean, Kate was just mentioning just now about the passions that she saw when she was younger and the way that evolved. And I do think, I mean, I've been involved with nature conservation for a very long time, but one thing that does strike me was that in the era where wildlife trusts, for example, were run very much more on volunteers, with volunteer groups, with looking after nature reserves and so on, the shift over to the, if you like, professionalisation of nature conservation and the advent of, dare I say, Heritage Lottery Fund, much as though it's a very, very good thing, you know, and in terms of the fact that money had not been there. However, it kind of industrialised the whole thing, which made it much more difficult. And actually the targets that people fought for in the Wildlife and Countryside Act of 1980, those targets were very much easier targets than ones we've got today, because there was damage happening at Twyford Down, or there was this, there was that. So it was very easy to focus on it and go for it. Whereas now it's much more diffuse, and from what we've heard this morning, those overarching things are so colossal that most people would just feel completely blinded by it. Sorry, thank you. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I'm Julian Pitt from Snowdonia Society. A question primarily for Tom Pike. You mentioned in your talk an initiative called REVERE, that's an acronym, with an investment vehicle called Palladium involved. And if I understood it correctly, this is an initiative of all 15 national parks, so that includes the 3 in Wales, to leverage private finance for investment in natural capital. And you mentioned peat and woodland planting and other aspects. I'd like to hear a little bit more from you about this, and perhaps where we can find more information. Specifically, I have to say I was just a little incredulous, because generally private investment has a profit motive, and I'm just wondering if that is the motive, not anything against that, or whether there are other motives for private finance involvement.
No, it's a really good question. I can tell you so much, but I'd direct you to the website. I'm not sure. There might well have been a link on my at the bottom of my slides, but there is definitely a website that will explain significantly more and probably better than I can. So yeah, it's a partnership amongst the 15 UK national parks. So colleagues in Snowdonia have been equally involved in this, to the extent that Snowdonia is benefiting. I'm not entirely certain, but you can talk to the guys in the team there, and I'm sure they'd explain a little bit more. I mean, the concept, I suppose, loosely speaking, is this, and it links back to your question about profit motive. There's little getting away from it, that we still live in a capitalist society. So business is ultimately still driven by a profit motive, but ultimately your ability to make sustainable profit depends on delivering what your customers are looking for. And your customers, whether they're private customers or shareholders, are increasingly asking and indeed demanding that those businesses adopt certain environmental and social governance goals, ESG goals, within their businesses. And increasingly they're funding them to do that as well. And so you may take it with a pinch of salt with certain companies, and certainly it's important that we do our due diligence in terms of those partners. But equally, there are many companies that are very, very genuine about wanting to do more and wanting to do a better job for the climate and for nature. A good example from previous roles I've worked in is Unilever, actually. Really, really big food company, took really seriously, and the Paul Pullman, who was the previous chief executive, its responsibilities from a kind of global ESG perspective, and did an awful lot in developing countries in terms of its work on improving social outcomes for workers, but also in terms of the environment. But not every company can work on the scale of a Unilever or a Shell or whoever it might be, in terms of working with a big landowner, let's say, in terms of rewilding an area of land. They can't operate on that scale. Yet there are many smaller companies that want to do their bit and want to find a way of doing their bit to offset their emissions or offset their wider environmental impact. And so the concept behind Revere is to create that vehicle that sort of acts as a bit of a pooling mechanism that pulls funding from ultimately from the private sector, and then through national park authorities works with either individual landowners or groups of landowners and farmers and others on the ground to deliver nature-based solutions to offset the impact of what they're doing. It's not the only model out there. I've seen a number of others, mainly in the farming sector, although they're very, very young and very, very nascent. But my sense is that this will be a growing opportunity, and a growing opportunity not just because of the kind of regulatory requirements that governments around the world are increasingly posing on businesses. Obviously, in our own case, it's in England, it's the 2050 net zero commitment, but also because their customers and their shareholders expect them to do it. And I do believe there's something genuine in that. Yes, it's important that in terms of the companies that are welcomed into a portfolio where you're working with conservation bodies like national park authorities, there are certain criteria, and I believe they are, and I think there's a bit more information on the website. But personally, I'd rather be at the forefront of that, and at the forefront of creating opportunities for people within national parks that can deliver nature-based solutions to climate change, albeit in a sensitive way to the landscape, than missing out on those opportunities, because I think we're well placed.
Hi, Rose O'Neill from Campaign for National Parks. I just wanted to thank you for speaking so eloquently about the challenges that we face today, which are so different perhaps to what were faced in 1949, and how we as a movement need to adapt and change to be relevant and resilient. So I'm really interested, looking ahead 70 years, in your view as a panel of what national parks might be then, and how they might be different in order for future generations to enjoy the benefits.
Who wants to go first?
You're looking at me.
Kate, you have
okay. They must still be, relatively wild. They must be wild, and or the ones that are, wild country now. I wouldn't want to lose wild country personally, because that is kind of what spoke to me right in the beginning. I would want them to have variety and rich in nature. It may not be the same species that we have now, because climate crisis means that species will change, but places of fascination, and places where people can still get the mental physical relief that they need. I just find it impossible to envisage what they'll actually look like, or but I just know that they will always be important. While there are people on this earth, national parks will always be important to us as places that we can rely upon to be special, to be protected, to retain their special characters. And it's that character that is so important. Even if it changes, it's still going to be important. So I can't give you a really very helpful answer on that, because I do measure things by what I know today. I'm not good at kind of thinking, completely differently for the future.
I'm going to put a couple more of you on the spot. Debbie, what do you think? Shortly.
It's again, it's...
Doesn't matter if you get it wrong.
No. Who will know? I think I saw a tiny little glimpse of one of the changes we might have. There was a fairly controversial sculpture put on the moors just above us. I thought it was wonderful. Not everyone agreed. But there was something profound that changed. People came from all over to see this sculpture. It was on Facebook. It had our postcode, so we saw quite a lot of people come and knock on our door and say, "Where's the sculpture?" But some people came in sort of strappy sandals to walk over the moor. Some people came booted up. But people came. And I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful in how we have built our national parks, built with a very small b, our national parks for the future, that is, you do go out at the weekend or during holidays or whatever, and may not be the sitting man. It may be to see that wonderful woodland where you can see jays or things like that. It may be to see that still water. It may be, it will be a pool. And I know that people from areas that normally wouldn't come to the North York Moors National Park, because one of the things I was really worried about with working with people said, it's not for us. Please. It's not for us. It's a white middle class thing. And that's an absolute disaster. But I did see, just in a microcosm, just in one thing that was different and interesting, the potential of people coming and enjoying what we have in our national parks. So I'm hanging on to that.
Tom, your shot.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, it's nobody has a crystal ball. I suppose a couple of kind of spontaneous reflections. So the first would be that, in a way, national parks have kind of stood the test of time. And I think it's almost the sort of original founding motivation that Ian talked about and Kate talked about is almost come back around again, in the sense that people have reconnected a little bit more with nature and reconnected with a little bit more with national parks. And I've always personally felt, as somebody who kind of grew up on the edge of the Peak District and spent a lot of time in the Dales and in the moors a little bit when I was growing up as well, that opportunity to kind of get out and about in these great places, that are fantastic views, fantastic landscapes, are tranquil, but they're also they're lived in. They're not a kind of complete sort of artifice. I think is really important, and I think that'll still be important in 70 years' time. I don't know, but if we cast our minds forward in 70 years' time, we'll certainly be a bigger population. Whether it'll be still an urbanised population, given changes in technology, I don't know, and I think that's the little bit to just do a little bit of sort of forward casting on. So I think it's still a big opportunity. If I had a kind of risk, I mean, I'd echo what Debbie says about being really, really relevant to what society and the next generation want and need, and it kind of speaks a little bit to the question earlier about young people. One of the things I learned about working in retail is your customer will always tell you what's right. Understanding what your customer's looking for and what they know and understand, absolutely vital. Generally, I think national parks have got a good rep, but there is a risk that we've got a good rep amongst a declining population, and so I think that's really important. The watch out is around levelling down as opposed to levelling up. I love the fact that we've got a family of kind of 10 special protected places or conserved places. I agree actually with a number of people who say that protection and conservation isn't just kind of preserving things in aspect, it's evolving in time. But keeping those 10, I think, as really special is important. The levelling down for me would be actually seeing national parks as nothing more than actually just trying to improve the environment of the countryside as a whole. Actually, if I think from my former farming perspective, yes, every part of the country's got to do its bit for the environment, but there are parts of the country where I think actually modern productive farming is absolutely the right thing to do and promote and should be supported. And yet we don't want to trash the environment in doing so. But there are parts of the country where the environment should be really important and promoted. And my concern at the moment is a lot of the language I hear is about, giving more to national parks means we don't do anything else in the rest of the country. And actually, I think there's a case for doing more in national parks.
David?
Yeah, 70 years on, the river's still flowing. Likely to be far more extremes. So there'll be much more flooding, much more drought, but there will be extremes. But there'll be still willing volunteers and people coming together locally to deliver outcomes on the ground. And they'll say, thank goodness, 70 years ago, people planted these trees, protected that bit of the river, did that to help the environment. What are we going to do for the next 70 years beyond where we are now?
And I think if I add my little one in there, if I may, I think that we will find the mechanism to cause people, I say cause, that's the wrong word really, to encourage people to actually bother. And that word bother, I mean, I was asked by some consultants for a major advertising campaign about, they said, Ian, you do lots of things to do with the countryside. What is the one word that you would use? They were looking for a single word that you would use to express what mattered. And I said the word bother. Whether you're a chief executive of a big company, whether you're an individual, if you just bother and think it matters. And I think the thing we found in 1989 when we did the Watch Over the National Parks campaign, and I don't even know whether this is still true today, is that whilst we lived in the world of clear knowledge of the national parks, very familiar with what they were, what their names were, what it was all about, that it was very difficult. I remember Derek Barber going on Radio 4 and they said to him, well, what is it you want people to actually do? What do you want them to do? And he said, well, and he didn't have an answer. It wasn't his fault. He was trying to elevate the whole principle of national parks. But his answer was simply, well, we want them to watch over them, we want them to care. And one of the things I think that I found certainly then in handling PR stuff with it was that it was the wrong question we were asking the public about what they knew about national parks. Because if you said to people, do you want to trash Rosedale? Or what do you think about wrecking Cook Monument? Or, you know, how do you get on in Dalby Forest? They'd know what you were talking about. And we suddenly found that actually it was their affinity was with the special places within the national parks, not necessarily with the concept in itself. You know, I can only think that we will find an answer to that because, and we'll also find an answer to having to balance that with the impacts of all the people who'll be enthusiastic to do it. And that might mean the word no in some instances, but I mean a nice no, and a no which I hope people will understand.
But yeah, you mentioned the Watch Over National Parks campaign. I'm probably one of the few in this room who remember it and who criticised it at the time because it was watch. And do you know what they had as their emblem was the Merlin, which is a secretive bird. So it just seemed mad to me, and I must say I was very frustrated by it.
Oh, I didn't do that.
No, you didn't do that. But you talked about repeating that, but it's got to be a campaign, for that.
Oh, that's right. Something like that means it was a nice idea. Yeah.
Didn't go anywhere.
Yes. Yes, definitely.
Kate Senior from the North York Moors Association. David, I was very interested, you just mentioned in passing the Beavers, and I've actually had the privilege of visiting the Beavers, and I was wondering, talking about working with nature, what would happen if we let the Beavers out and get on with it? How would that be good nature?
Well, there are some trials. There are some trials taking place. The River Otter project down in Devon, where, and again up in Scotland, because I think the beavers from the North almost came from Scotland. So, but again, it's about working with the community, working with local farmers, landowners. So there is that local support for rewilding and working with nature to provide broader solutions. So we're open to all ideas.
I'm Adrian Lehman, NIMA. I just want to ask, how scared are you? Are you scared about coming to grips with the social and technical changes that are about to hit us? Because I am, and it doesn't seem to me that you're actually scared enough. Understanding what is actually going on, the kind of social changes, like meta environments, Californian digital people creating new experiences and talking about not the environment but their own version of the environment. And these kind of trends are really quite scary. They scare me, and I wonder just how scared are you?
Debbie, you get it again.
Technology doesn't scare me. Technology transition doesn't scare me. Maybe because I'm lucky enough to be a scientist and I've seen massive changes both in my field and other fields. What scares me is people and people's behaviour. Because I genuinely think that many people looking at something so vast and extant as climate change compartmentalise it in their heads. They think that someone else is going to solve it or someone else is going to do it. I don't have to change. And that's why I've said a couple of times, and I passionately believe it, the importance of communities. Because in a community, a healthy community, you'll have young people, middle-aged people, I don't want to change people, and they will together, those that fear will be led through by those that are looking forward with huge excitement to a better world.
Right. The sociologist Michael Young had a great one-liner which was, habit is the flywheel of society. And to me, that is the most dangerous thing of all, and which connects exactly with what you just said.
Yeah. I'll let my colleagues
Anyone
take
else want to add anything? No? Okay. Any other questions for the floor?
May I just add one thing to your excellent question? Everyone that leaves today, if you just spend half an hour, look forward and say to yourself, how am I going to behave differently in order to be part of this change, rather than resisting this change? Because I think if you sort it out in your own mind, in the comfort of your own home, it will be less of a problem than if you keep pushing it away and saying it won't happen. So just take half an hour when you get home to think, how am I going to do things differently? What am I going to stop doing? What am I going to do more of to make this planet habitable, livable and wonderful for 2 generations, 3 generations hence?
Yes, I think in a way that is actually an extremely nice note, an important note to finish on, because I think what Debbie has done by saying that, as she's really encapsulated in the simplest terms the thing that lies fundamentally at the bottom of everything we've all talked about. I mean, we've shared all the complexities, but the fundamental bottom line is, and that fits very well with my feeling of the word bother, is that if people individually bother and realise the need to do it, unless they do that, there isn't really any way forward at all, because that's what the whole show depends on, and that's what, in fact, we'll be encouraging people to do.